Israel reported that its forces were engaged in an intense fight against Hamas militants through airstrikes that hit the group's tunnel network in the northern Gaza Strip. A tragic episode took place in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza, where at least 50 people lost their lives. Israeli Army spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht confirmed the attack and noted the presence of a prominent Hamas leader in that area. The Israel Defense Forces subsequently announced the elimination of a key militant in these attacks, identifying the man as Ibrahim Viari, who was responsible for a deadly terrorist attack in Israel. Jabalia had been home to refugee families who had fled conflicts dating back to 1948. According to Palestinian health authorities, at least 50 people were killed and 150 injured in the attack on the refugee camp. Hamas, in a statement, alleged that there were no commanders present in the camp and stated that the number of fatalities or injuries amounted to 400. For a long period, Israeli authorities had maintained suspicions about the use of population centers as entry points to tunnels by Hamas militants. In response to these concerns, the refugee camp was targeted. The details of this offensive are as follows. Israeli tanks and infantry carried out attacks on tunnel entrances and rocket launching positions in additional clashes with Hamas around Gaza City and in the south. The IDF also reported that combined air and ground forces hit nearly 300 targets in the last 24 hours, including anti-tank missiles and underground rockets, as well as military compounds in Hamas's underground tunnels. According to the military, Hamas fighters were killed during the operation. The tunnels have been one of Israel's main concerns, but with this attack they have made significant progress. Hitting 300 targets in a single attack represents a great achievement for the Israeli army. Israeli ground forces faced Hamas fighters who were based in an extensive network of tunnels, which is a priority target for Israel. It is believed that some of the 240 hostages Israel claims were captured by Hamas may be being held in the tunnel complex. Therefore, Israel's main focus in this operation has been the dismantling of the tunnels, which adds an additional complication to the already challenging operations in a densely populated urban environment. Jonathan Conricus, an Israeli military spokesman, explained that ground operations have focused on northern Gaza, including Gaza City, which Hamas considers its nerve center. Conricus added, "But we continue to strike in other parts of Gaza, going after their commanders, hitting their infrastructure, and every time there is a major target linked to Hamas, we hit it." In response to these attacks, Hamas announced that its forces were attacking Israeli trucks, tanks, and bulldozers with machine guns and Al-Yasin 105 anti-tank missiles, a locally produced anti-tank weapon. Despite the lack of an imminent ceasefire in the current conflict, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected international calls to end hostilities. Felipe Lazzarini, director of the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, expressed concern to the United Nations Security Council that Israel's bombing campaign in Gaza has become collective punishment against the Palestinians as a whole. Lazzarini noted that basic services in Gaza are collapsing due to shortages of medicine, food, water, and fuel, and that streets are flooded with sewage. Furthermore, the communications blackout over the weekend has increased the panic and anguish of the population, accelerating the collapse of public order. Thousands of people in need began looting UNRWA warehouses and distribution centers receiving humanitarian supplies from Egypt. UNRWA Director Felipe Lazzarini informed the council that 64 UNRWA co-workers had lost their lives in Gaza in the previous 3 weeks. Among the victims was the head of security and police for the Central Zone, along with his wife and 8 others, who were killed shortly before a scheduled meeting of the Security Council. According to health authorities in Hamas-controlled Gaza, Israel's bombing campaign has resulted in the deaths of more than 8,500 Palestinians in the region since the start of the conflict. It is regrettable that Israel does not distinguish between civilians and combatants when carrying out its attacks. In the devastating attack on Israeli lands, Israeli officials reported that more than 14 people were killed and another 240 people were taken hostage. The White House decided not to issue a statement on the airstrike that took place at the refugee camp. However, U.S. officials were reported to have urged their Israeli counterparts to take precautionary measures to reduce the number of civilian casualties. Adrienne Watson, spokesperson for the National Security Council, expressed her sorrow for each and every innocent life that has been lost as a result of these conflicts, including those that occurred today. In Washington, protesters interrupted Secretary of State Anthony Blinken's testimony in the Senate and chanted slogans calling for help for young Palestinians in Gaza. The call for peace and the protection of civilian lives has become increasingly urgent in the midst of this conflict. According to a State Department announcement, Blinken plans to leave for Israel the next day to meet with several Israeli administration officials, as well as make other trips in the region. He is expected to have meetings with members of the Israeli administration, although it is not clear if he will meet with Palestinian government officials during his visit. In the last month and a half, Blinken has already made 2 trips to the Middle East. As for the Pentagon, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin met with Benny Gantz and stressed the importance of protecting innocent people. However, the Defense Department emphasized that it was providing advice and guidance to the Israeli military without issuing orders or imposing restrictions on the use of U.S.-supplied weaponry. These restrictions included artillery, precision munitions, and air defense systems. Pentagon spokesman Brigg noted that his concerns about protecting innocent lives and respecting the laws of war have been expressed both in public and in private conversations. It is worth mentioning that there are diverse opinions in Israel regarding the provision of aid to Gaza. Some Israelis oppose providing assistance, while others, like Nadav Eyal, argue that security authorities prefer to increase humanitarian supplies to maintain international support for the military operation that is expected to last a month. The situation in the region remains complex and contentious, with debates over how to address the conflict and its humanitarian consequences. Concern in Lebanon about the escalation of tensions between Israel and the armed group Hezbollah is understandable. Despite the sympathy of many Lebanese towards the Palestinians in Gaza, there is growing fear that the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah could spread and spiral out of control. Although the dispute originated in previous conflicts that were limited to the border region between Israel and Lebanon, both sides have carried out attacks deeper into the other country's territory in recent days, focusing on military outposts and fighters, albeit with few civilian casualties so far. As a result of escalating tensions, many Lebanese cities have been caught in the crossfire and abandoned by their residents, who have sought refuge in areas considered safer, such as the outskirts of Beirut, where Hezbollah has its stronghold. The location is currently considered risk-free, but concerns remain. The online petition you mentioned, with thousands of signatures, urges the Lebanese government to resist the temptation to get involved in the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, warning of the risk of Lebanon being used as a battleground for indirect conflicts between powers. International. This concern is valid, and Lebanon is in a delicate situation due to its proximity to tensions between Israel and Iran, backer of Hezbollah. The international community continues to closely monitor the situation and calls for containment and peaceful resolution of tensions in the region. Stability in Lebanon is essential to avoid an even broader and more dangerous conflict in the Middle East.